What is happening, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Go check out the last video if you missed it. We got this truck back together, got the bumpers on, got the lights wired, got the plow wired. We got it all back together and working really good. Now, as far as today goes, I want to get working on the suspension. So I have some heavier springs for the front end, just to keep the front end up with the extra weight of the plow, the winch, and the bumper. It does sag it down a little bit, so we got heavier springs. I want to drop the whole, basically, you call it the subframe, I guess, where the control arms and the differential mounts, it all kind of bolts through the same mounts on the frame. So I should be able to take that mount, drop that down, and I'll get a differential drop, and I'll drop the control arms. So that's gonna help kind of correct the geometry of the suspension and also correct the CV axle angles, because these are going to lift it a little bit more. So we're going to have a little bit more angle on the CV axles. That's why I want to kind of drop that front differential and the control arms. One thing I want to do real quick before we tear this thing apart is I want to measure, I guess we'll just measure the bumper height here, and then I want to get the plow off the ground, see how much this thing sags down with the weight of the plow lifted up, and then kind of compare that to the new springs. I don't suspect, I guess, to be a whole lot different because these are a progressive spring, so it's a variable spring rate. So at the top it's a little bit softer, and then as it compresses, the spring rate increases and there's more bottoming resistance. So the initial load on the springs, it might actually drop down a little bit more than I really think it will, but I guess we'll see once we get them on. So let's measure it. Let's lift up the plow, measure it again. We'll record that measurement, and then we can start tearing this thing apart. I know you guys are gonna ask why I never put this on the lift. I've tried many times to get this thing on the lift, but with this rear arm, this is an asymmetrical lift, so with the rear arm being so long, there's nowhere I can really lift from. I was going to try lifting on that main leaf spring mount there, and then the front arm there, but they stick too far in. These rear arms are just too long. So I'm just gonna do it the old school way. We'll jack it up, get some jack stands under the front, get this thing up in the air and rip the struts out, swap those springs, get it back on the ground. I might have to actually do something with camber, because you can see these front tires are cambered in quite a bit. So I got to mess around with the strut spacers that are on here now. I might make those adjustable. I'm not really sure. Once we tear it apart, we'll figure out what we got to do to correct that camber. Well, guys, lifting that plow up really only sags the front end down about a half or maybe 3/4 inch. So not really that bad. I thought it was more when I originally put the plow on. And I watched that video, it looked like it sagged down at least 1.5 inches. We'll call it 3/4 inch. We'll swap these springs and then we can try that again. All right, that was pretty easy. Got the struts off. There was just 2 bolts in the knuckle on the bottom, and then where the strut bolts to the top. One thing I noticed was, you guys probably saw as well, when I pulled these off, there was a bunch of washers stacked up on the inside to kind of pivot that out. I think these are honestly on upside down. If I were to flip these, it would pull the top of the strut out this way. It would correct that weird camber I was having. So we're gonna have to figure that out once we get these back on. But we got to figure out these springs first. So these might be a bit of work to get on there. You can see they're probably, I don't know, 2 inches longer. I know these ones are compressed on the strut itself, but let's get these things off and see if we can get the new springs on. I picked these compressors up just on Amazon. We're going to try these ones out. I have seen people have good luck with this style on these smaller struts and smaller springs where there's not a whole lot of room. So we'll get these on, get these cranked down. We actually got to pull the spacers off first, and then we'll compress these springs, take the top hat off, and see if we can get these ones compressed enough to get on these struts. Well, we got these new progressive springs on. These compressors worked really good, actually. Fit in there nicely. One thing we gotta do before we throw those struts back on is there's a steering bushing. We're gonna have to pull the plow mount off, but there's a bushing kind of where both steering rods come into a little triangle. There's a bushing in there that is very loose. So I'm going to pull the plow mount off, get up in there, and we'll swap that bushing out. If you look up here, you can see the steering arm right here and the bushing to that frame. So you can see how much play is in that thing. So we got to get probably have to pull the tie rods and this other rod, unbolt it from the frame, and we should be able to pull that thing out and swap that bushing. All right, we got bushing back in. We are good to go. Before I throw the steering back together, I want to lower everything like I said. So let's get down to here. Hopefully you guys can kind of see the game plan here. So if you look back here, these lower control arms are on these brackets here, which bolt up to the frame there and there. So on this cross member, we have the differential and the lower control arms. The front diff mount we're gonna have to drop. This is welded onto the frame, you can see here. So we're just gonna have to make a drop bracket here, and then I'm gonna make like basically a spacer block in between this main bracket and the frame. So we'll drop that. I think I'm gonna do 1.5 inches. I will probably have 3.5 inches of lift, but I don't wanna drop it that far because one, you can see the drive line right there. We don't have a whole lot of room between that and that cross member, and I don't really feel like remaking that cross member. And another thing is ground clearance. I don't want to drop everything down too far and screw my ground clearance up. So I think 1.5 inches will get me good with CV axles. The steering, mounts here, so that's not going to change. But dropping this whole cross member down is going to help CV axles and that kind of geometry with these lower control arms that are not so pitched down. All right, we got this diff sitting about as far down as I can without completely redoing that cross member. I'm still probably gonna have to pull it off and cut a little bit out of the back. If you can see that, the drive shaft right there is right about touching that cross member, but there's probably a 1/2 inch lip right there. I could cut out and plate it. So the back here is dropped 1 inch right now, and then I dropped the front a little bit more. It's about 2 inches to pitch the diff up and get a little bit better of a pinion angle, and that also helped getting that drive shaft to clear a little bit better. All right guys, we are just about done. So this is the front hanger for the front differential. You can see I welded a tube in there so it doesn't screw up that mount, and then that is dropped 2 inches. And like I said, the rear mounts here are dropped 1 inch. So that's sitting right about where it should be. The drive line so far is clearing. Once I get it all bolted up, get the jack out of here, get everything bolted in. I'll figure out if that cross member back here needs any clearancing, but for now, I think I'm just going to leave it. All right, guys, we are back on the ground, looking really good. You can see it probably gave it another 1.5 inches maybe of lift. So the front is a little bit higher right now. I am planning on doing something about that though. Also, I want to show you guys underneath, you can see with that diff dropped, those CV axles really don't have that much angle. It's looks a little bit more severe on this side because that is the short shaft. What we could actually do real quick is, I forgot I measured, we could measure this bumper height, which before it was 27, now we're about 30.5. Wow, that lifted it a lot more than I thought. That'll probably settle a little bit just from getting those springs settled in, but I guess, yeah, it did lift it quite a bit more. So I'm sure if I didn't drop that differential, we'd have some major issues, but now with that diff dropped, I think we're gonna be perfect. Well, after jumping this thing around, kind of moving it back and forward, getting these springs settled just a little bit, the tires did camber in. So they're like 3 degrees, and actually they both are about 3 degrees, which this one looks like it's cambered more, but the toe is way off too, so that could add to it. But either way, what I think I'm going to do is pull these struts or pull the spacers out, cut the top off, and like I said, weld a plate with a nut on it and a slot so we can adjust that camber, and we can dial it in once and for all and not have to worry about the camber being off. All right, we got this thing back together. So you can see there's a little bit more adjustment right here, but for this front bolt, the nut on the bottom is hitting the bottom part of that spacer. So that's as far out as I can go. And instead of being negative camber with the top pushed in, now we are positive, like 2 degrees on both sides. So that is going to work perfect. All we got to do to adjust this, loosen this main bolt here, jack it up a little bit to get the weight off the suspension, and then just move that in or out, whichever way you need to go. Tighten the bolt back down and camber. We can dial it in 100% perfect. So very happy that worked out. What I'm going to do now, pull it all apart. We got to sandblast everything, the lift blocks, the lowering blocks for the diff, and then that front hanger. Sandblast all that, get it powder coated, and then we can throw it on and be done with it. Alright guys, while the parts in the oven are heating up, I want to talk real quick about the sponsor for today's video, Prismatic Powders. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, Prismatic Powders has got everything you need. They have literally every single color you could ever imagine for powder coats. They have many different lines of powder coat. What I'm using today is a stone black. This is just a one-step process, but there's a few other powder coats that require a 2 or a 3 step. Some of them have a chrome base that you lay down and then a transparent color on top of that. That's more like your candy colors. That's how you get that really sharp and cool color. They also have stuff that you lay the color down and then clear coat. All sorts of different stuff. Like I said, any color you could ever imagine. Go check them out at prismaticpowders.com. So like always with this stone black, we're gonna give this stuff probably 10-15 minutes to preheat in the oven. That just helps burn off any oils that may have been on the parts. So once those get up to temp, we'll bring them out and spray them out. And then I wasn't able to fit everything on one rack, so we have 2 racks, so we're going to be doing 2 rounds. So once you're done spraying the powder, you throw it back in the oven. You wait till the part itself reaches 400 degrees, and then you start your timer for 12 minutes. That is what this stone black cures for. Be sure to check the sheet for the color that you're using. So this bakes 400 degrees for 12 minutes. All right, we're sitting back on the ground and I just took a wild guess at the camber adjustment. This one's like 0.4 degrees out. This one was like 0.1, so I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna try to adjust this one just a smidge, just to get it dialed in. And then I just did a rough estimate on the toe. I'm actually gonna run a string from the rear tires to the front and just get that close enough. That is good enough for a truck like this. All right, you guys can see we're right about 0.1, 0.2, so we are good to go. Now I'm gonna run a string, like I said, from the back tire to the front on both sides, and then we can adjust the toe. All right, we got both sides strung out. Make sure you get the steering wheel straight and keep checking it, because when you adjust the tie rods, sometimes that wheel moves. So what we got here, you can see we're touching in the front, but we got about a 1/4 inch gap in the back. And then this side is the opposite. So it's touching in the back, and then it's got about a 1/4 inch gap right up front. So I'm gonna adjust this tire out a little bit and then adjust the other one in on the front on the tie rods. The tie rod is on the front of the spindle. So we'll adjust that, get it close, and tighten the nuts up and be done. All right guys, I'm just comparing the weight of the plow when I lift it up, if you remember in the beginning of the video. So I think it sagged about 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch on the original stock springs. This one went from 29 3/4 to 29 1/4, so a 1/2 inch, so not too bad. The cool thing about these springs are they're progressive. So like I said, the more you get into that spring, the stiffer it gets. So it's gonna have a lot more bottoming resistance. It's gonna handle this plow a lot better. All right, that is a wrap for this video. Really happy with how everything turned out at the front. We got the camber dialed in, the height dialed in. Like I said, I am gonna do something with the back because it's got like 8-inch shackles. They're way too long. They look funky. They're just kind of hanging down. They're gonna catch on to everything. So I am going to be shortening those up and doing something else with the rear in the next video, so definitely stay tuned for that video. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Go smash that thumbs up button, comment, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.